Hey guys, tonight we drift down to the banks of the Nile. Not the postcard one with pyramids and camel rides, but the soggy, whispering version thick with reeds, frogs, and the occasional suspicious ripple. The sky's painted in soft twilight, and the water is slow, almost drowsy. This is where Papyrus was born, not in some golden tomb or scholarly scroll, but out here, where sandals squelch in the mud and everything smells like wet grass and distant fish. You're floating now, belly up in your mind's canoe, and it's somehow not even uncomfortable. Fireflies wink around you. Reeds sway like they're whispering secrets. Everything is quiet, except for the kind of splash that always makes you wonder if that was a crocodile or just a particularly clumsy duck. Probably best not to check. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely like what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far these sleepy trips travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drift closer to the bank, just close enough to catch the smell. Grassy, green, and just a little bit swampy. The Nile's floodplain is wide and generous this year, and Papyrus is growing like it knows it's got purpose. You hear it before you really see it, a kind of rustling, like soft paper in the wind. The stalks are tall and sturdy, rising high with thick triangular stems. This plant isn't delicate. It's not dainty. It grows in dense clusters, anchoring itself with tangled roots that hold tight to the silty river mud. You glide past a fisherman muttering to himself, not even glancing up, as he stabs at the water with a pronged stick. Further up, two barefoot boys are racing each other through the reeds, trailing clouds of dragonflies and yelling something about Thoth's snot, which you decide is best left unexplored. Ancient Egyptians didn't invent papyrus. They just noticed it and decided, hey, that looks writable. What they did invent was turning it into scrolls, record keeping, sacred texts, and bureaucratic joy-kill. And what a beautiful irony. The plant that grows quietly in riverbanks became the loudest voice of a civilization. You feel the breeze slip past your face. Someone is singing in the distance, a low, tuneless hum. Maybe a farmer, or someone who just likes the sound of their own voice. You lie back and let your thoughts wander to those who came before you, thousands of years ago, walking along this same shore. Maybe they stubbed their toes on the same submerged stones. Maybe they also wondered why frogs scream when you get too close. Papyrus was everything to them, not just paper, but boats, mats, sandals, baskets. Basically, if you could braid it, beat it, or float on it, they tried it. That plant was the ancient Egyptian version of duct tape, and yet historians still argue whether papyrus was ever truly mass-produced in the way we think of paper today. Did villages along the Nile have dedicated papyrus workshops? Or was it more like a cottage industry? Families passing down slicing techniques like Grandma's secret pie crust recipe. The sources don't agree, Of course they don't. They're mostly written on, you guessed it, papyrus, which has a bit of a shelf life problem. A heron flaps low overhead. It looks annoyed, like it's been kicked out of its favorite napping spot. You don't blame it. There's something almost spiritual about the way this place folds into itself. The thick air, the wet earth, the quiet labor of plants just growing. You wouldn't survive 5 minutes out here in real life. Dysentery, sunstroke, or a chance encounter with a hippo. But in your imagination, you're invincible and hydrated. You brush your fingers along the tops of the papyrus reeds. The stalks are firm but spongy. A pale green on the outside, darker where the light doesn't reach. Each one looks like it might contain something important inside. And in a way, it does. These plants are the beginning of books, of love poems, of tax returns, unfortunately. The papyrus plant, Cyperus papyrus, was sacred, not in the dramatic lightning and offering sense, but in the slow, persistent reverence of a people who truly lived in sync with their environment. It wasn't just useful, it was symbolic. It stood for life, order, and Lower Egypt. Lotus for Upper Egypt, papyrus for Lower. North meets South. Petal meets stalk. That kind of thing. There's a monument in Karnak where papyrus stalks are carved as columns, rising so high you could swear they touch the sky. Imagine using office supplies as architectural inspiration. Somewhere in ancient Memphis, an artisan probably said, "Let's make this place feel like the inside of a scroll," and no one questioned it. But your mind is wandering again. The boat nudges a sandbar, and a pair of turtles glare at you like you've interrupted a very important meeting. You apologize and drift on. Somewhere behind you, a donkey brays like it's challenging the sun to a yelling contest. It's almost dark now. The Nile is going glassy. You imagine someone lighting an oil lamp in a small house just beyond the reeds. A mother pulling out a wrapped bundle of scrolls from a clay jar, wiping the dust off. Reading bedtime stories that begin once upon a time in the 18th dynasty. Probably with fewer crocodile jokes than this one. Your eyes start to get heavy. The water moves in slow swirls beneath you. Everything smells like warm mud and old grass. You've only just begun this sleepy scroll, and already the real world feels fuzzy and far away. You step out of your drifting canoe onto a patch of mud that squelches so perfectly underfoot, it might just lull you into a nap. The bank is thick with reeds, and above them, the sky is caught between lavender and gold. This is harvesting time. You're not here to philosophize tonight. You're here to get your hands sticky. But don't worry, it's the kind of slow, repetitive work that makes your brain melt into pudding in a good way. Papyrus stalks stretch above your head, clustered so tight it feels like they're guarding secrets. They sway in the faint breeze, clicking together with a sound that's somewhere between dry paper and lazy applause. The base of each stalk is triangular, Seriously, go check that fun geometry next time you're sleepwalking in a marsh. And each one grows up to 10 or even 15 feet tall. You pluck one stalk gently, then another. The plant resists with a little pop, a final protest before becoming something important, or possibly just something bureaucratic. In your hand, the stalk is firm and damp, the outer layer smooth but fibrous. You glance around and realize you're not alone. There are others, barefoot, tunic-clad, shoulders sunburned in that reddish Egyptian way that says, "Yes, I work outside, and no, I don't moisturize." Their bronze sickles flash now and then in the sun, cutting the stalks low to the root. Someone hums a tune that might just be a prayer, or maybe just boredom with notes. The air is full of bugs, of course. Dragonflies dart around like tiny helicopters, trying to avoid your face. Mosquitoes make dinner plans on your arms. You consider slathering on some crocodile dung sunscreen, like ancient Egyptians sometimes did, but you politely decline the fantasy. You're committed to the sleep vibes, not the spa hazards. It's not glamorous work, but it's weirdly meditative. Reaching, pulling, bundling. The Nile murmurs beside you, and you can hear water buffalo grunting somewhere upstream. Every now and then, a papyrus stalk snaps with a dry crack, and you flinch like you broke a scroll before it was written. Papyrus isn't just any old plant. It was once called the plant of the gods. It was thought to be a gift from Thoth, the ibis-headed deity of writing, wisdom, and looking perpetually like he's got insider information. That's probably why you catch yourself whispering sorry to the plant each time you rip it from the earth. Just in case Thoth is watching. You never know with gods who moonlight as birds. You bundle the stalks together with strips of leftover reed, tying them like firewood. The smell is green and sharp, a little sour. You sling a bundle over your shoulder and squelch your way to a clearing where others have begun stacking their harvest. There's a low platform made of packed clay, and someone's already laying out the fresh-cut papyrus to dry slightly before the next stage. You sit beside them, wipe your forehead with your sleeve, and notice your hands smell like a wet envelope from 2,000 years ago. Here's a fun one. Historians still argue whether the earliest papyrus processing was done entirely by hand, or if early Egyptians developed simple tools to assist in stripping and pressing. There are no instruction manuals from 2500 BCE, unless you count hieroglyphs of men doing mysterious things with knives and reeds. One thing's for sure, the process was so routine, so essential, that most folks didn't think it needed documenting, which is either very humble or very unhelpful for future researchers. Beside you, an old man sits cross-legged, showing a young boy how to judge a good stalk. "Not too soft," he grumbles, "not too thick." He flicks a stalk and listens to the sound as if it's a bell. "Hear that? That's a pharaoh-grade reed." The boy nods, wide-eyed. You pretend you weren't listening, and pretend even harder that you know what pharaoh-grade sounds like. The sun's almost gone now, low enough to turn the sky orange and the Nile to liquid gold. The temperature drops just enough to make you notice the sweat cooling on your neck. There's laughter nearby. Someone slipped in the mud again. They're cursing in ancient Egyptian, which sounds exactly like regular cursing, but with more vowels. You smile to yourself. That's the magic of papyrus. It starts in the muck and somehow ends up in eternity. You rise with the sun already warming your back, and the scent of damp reeds clinging to your skin like a second tunic. The bundles of freshly harvested papyrus stalks creak as they're unloaded onto a wide, flat surface of smoothed clay. It's time to get slicing. You can feel the day stretching out ahead of you like a scroll waiting to be written. Except first, there's the small matter of peeling, soaking, pressing, and not losing your mind in the process. You kneel beside a low wooden table that's warped from years of wet work, and someone hands you a bronze blade, not quite sharp enough for battle, but perfect for vegetable warfare. The tool has no handle, just a broad curve designed for grip. You eye the papyrus stalk in your hand. It stares back, smug and cylindrical. Step 1. Strip away the green outer layer. It's not used for scrolls. Too tough, too fibrous. You slide the blade down one side of the stalk, notching a shallow line, and then begin to peel. The outer skin comes off with a satisfying snap, like a banana that's seen some things. Underneath, the stalk reveals its inner treasure, a soft, pale interior that feels like firm cucumber and smells like wet hay left in the sun. You place your peeled stalk on the table and begin slicing it lengthwise into long, thin strips. The first few are wonky, too thick, too crooked, but soon your rhythm sets in. Slice, pull, slice, peel. It's hypnotic in that slightly dangerous way, like cutting wrapping paper with scissors while trying to impress someone. The goal is consistency. Each strip needs to be flat and even, or your scroll ends up bumpy and annoying, like a historical smoothie made with pulp. A scribe wouldn't thank you for that. In fact, you'd probably end up cursed in a side note for making his ink blotch. You lay the strips into a bowl of river water. They begin to soften almost instantly, curling slightly as they relax, as if they're relieved to be free of their plant responsibilities. Some people add a touch of Nile silt to the soaking water, a fringe tradition believed to enhance the binding process. Others swear by adding fig sap or palm wine, which feels more like an excuse to use up leftovers than science. Historians still argue whether these additives actually helped or just made the paper smell funky. The soaking continues. You sit back on your heels and fan yourself with a palm frond someone left nearby. Around you, others are at various stages of the process, some slicing, some soaking, some just staring into space like they've been cursed by a god of mild tedium. There's a kind of peaceful monotony in the air, like everyone's forgotten that they're turning wet vegetables into the foundation of recorded thought. The strips, after soaking, become more pliable, almost stretchy. You lift one and drape it over your wrist. It clings gently, like a sleepy vine. It's ready. On a raised mat, woven from palm fibers, you start to lay the strips side by side, slightly overlapping, creating a horizontal layer that glistens in the sun. Then, with careful hands, you lay a second set of strips on top, this time vertically, like a crisscross sandwich. The ancient papyrus grid. The magic here isn't glue, it's plant chemistry. Papyrus contains natural sugars and saps that act like a mild adhesive. When pressure is applied, the layers fuse together as they dry. It's not glamorous, but it works. Kind of like your cousin who lives on chips and still has perfect skin. You place a second mat over the layered sheet, then a heavy stone slab on top. You can hear it squish faintly. The weight presses the fibers together, squeezing out excess moisture and starting the fusion process. Then you wait and wait. You're starting to understand why ancient scribes always look annoyed in their wall carvings. This is not a fast hobby. While the sheets press, someone nearby is arguing about whether a triple layer method is superior. You only half listen, content to let the scholarly debates swirl around you like flies. The triple layer theory posits that elite scrolls, those destined for royal decrees or magical texts, might have been made using a third diagonal layer for added strength. But papyrologists still can't agree, and no one wants to be the person to try it during nap time. You rise and stretch. Your legs ache. The sun is starting its cruel climb, and the Nile hums softly in the background. You can hear the temple drums in the distance. Someone's either summoning a god or just really excited about lunch. At your side, a cat slinks past and sniffs the papyrus press, probably judging your technique. Cats were sacred, but also kind of jerks. You offer it a strip of reed, and it bats it away, offended. Typical. Your fingers are sticky with sap. You wipe them on your linen tunic, which now smells like a compost pile. The drying takes time, maybe a full day, sometimes two. The sheets will be removed, smoothed, and left to bake in the Egyptian heat until firm but flexible. You glance toward the drying racks, rows of papyrus sheets already catching the light like scaly fish skin. Here's a fun bit. Some early papyrus sheets were reused. If the ink hadn't soaked in too deeply, scribes could wet the surface, scrape off the text, and write again. Recycled papyrus. So yes, even in 1500 BCE, someone was scribbling a passive-aggressive "do not erase" in the margins. You lie back on the ground, arms tucked under your head, letting the dust settle into your clothes. The buzzing of the river insects, the occasional laugh of a worker, the dull clunk of stone against mat. It's all part of the rhythm. This is the kind of slow history people rarely write about. The naps between invention, the mud under wisdom's fingernails. Your eyelids grow heavy. You close them and see strips of papyrus floating in your dreams, like sleepy bookmarks drifting downstream. You wake to the faint creaking of wooden poles shifting in the breeze, and a sunbeam stabbing your eyelids like an overly enthusiastic scribe. The papyrus sheets you helped press yesterday are dry now, neatly arranged across a low drying rack made of date palm wood and braided cord. They shimmer faintly, still a little tacky in the corners, but otherwise cured into something astonishing. Paper, sort of. You walk over and run your hand across the surface of one. It's light but firm, smooth yet textured, like dried orange peel. This is the moment where you finally understand how a swamp plant becomes an idea. Each sheet is the size of a small tray, and when you hold it up to the sun, you can see the woven lattice of horizontal and vertical strips, like a ghost grid. Time to trim. Someone hands you a curved blade, sharper than yesterday's slicing tool. You kneel again, back already complaining, and begin to neaten the edges of the sheet. No one wants a scroll that looks like it lost a fight with a goat. The goal here is to make rectangles, uniform, straight, polite. You slide the knife gently along the side, shaving off little curly reeds like vegetable confetti, and then comes the final stage, joining the sheets. Because no one's writing Hamlet on a single papyrus page. You need length, drama, room for complaints about grain delivery. The trick is overlap. Each sheet is glued edge to edge with a sticky paste made from flour or fermented barley water. You smear the paste carefully. Line up the next sheet so its edge overlaps the first by about an inch, and press gently with a stone weight. Repeat again and again. Eventually, you've got a full scroll, long enough to wrap around your arm a few times, like some kind of bureaucratic boa constrictor. This is where the term biblos came from, the Greek word for scrolls made from papyrus, named after the ancient city of Byblos. Also, coincidentally, where papyrus got a lot of international attention. Global trade was already flexing its muscles, even if it was mostly just slow boats and grainy contracts. Historians still debate the role of the bathhouse in Roman society. Was it a place for the elite to indulge and show off? Or was it a place for everyone, a public service that allowed even the poorest Romans access to water and a social space? It's a complicated issue, and like everything in Rome, the answer depends on perspective. From your point of view, it's both. The bathhouse serves the rich and the poor, but it's the workers like you who keep it running, who make it possible. And though the powerful may take the bathhouse for granted, you know the truth. Without you, the whole system would collapse. Tomorrow, there will be more faces, more requests, more needs. But for now, the bathhouse is still. The water in the pools calms, and the steam slowly dissipates. You stand there, looking around at the now empty chambers, the stillness settling over everything. There's a quiet satisfaction in this moment, the only one of the day when you can truly reflect. In the end, you know that your work is invaluable. It might not bring you fame or recognition, but it is necessary. You are part of the fabric of Roman life, and the empire couldn't function without the likes of you. The bathhouse will remain a symbol of power, wealth, and luxury, but it's also a place of labor. And as long as you are here, it will always be a place that work. The early morning light barely touches the edges of the bathhouse as you finish up the last of the evening's cleaning. The first few rays of the sun are just beginning to creep through the high windows. The air is still thick with the remnants of heat from the night, but there's a distinct chill that you can feel settling in. As the sun rises higher, the heat will return, and so will the crowds. But for now, in this brief moment of stillness, the bathhouse seems almost peaceful, an oasis untouched by the hustle and bustle of the day. You take a moment to lean against the cool stone of the wall and gather your thoughts. It's hard to put into words what the bathhouse means to you. It's your world, yes, but it's also a strange, detached world where you're both everywhere and nowhere at the same time. You see everything, yet you remain unseen. You witness the rituals of the powerful, their decadence, their conversations, but you never truly participate in it. In some ways, you're like a ghost, always in the background, always moving, never fully acknowledged. The bathhouse has its own rhythm, its own pulse, and you've learned to move with it. But there's something about the quietness before the crowds arrive that fills you with a rare sense of peace. It's like the calm before the storm. You know what's coming. Soon enough, the wealthy Romans will start to trickle in, each one with their own needs, their own demands, their own routine. They'll come in, step into the pools, and begin their daily ritual, oblivious to the fact that you're the one who's been setting the stage for them all along. As you begin preparing for the day ahead, adjusting the temperature of the water, arranging the towels, and setting out the oils, you can't help but think about the strange nature of your role in the empire. Here you are, a lowly bathhouse attendant, performing the same tasks every day. Yet without you, the entire system would collapse. The wealthy and powerful may think that they control their world, but it's the unnoticed workers like you who truly keep the gears turning. This invisible power is something you've learned to wield over time. You've seen how a simple adjustment to the water temperature can change a person's entire day, or how a perfectly applied oil can elevate someone's mood. They may never realize it, but their comfort depends on you. You know the bathhouse better than anyone, even better than the bathers themselves. You know which pools are the hottest, which are the coldest, and which rooms have the best acoustics for conversation. You've seen the subtle hierarchies play out in the way people move through the space. The rich take the prime spots, while the lower classes are relegated to the less desirable areas. But despite all this, There's a sense of anonymity in it all. The bathers come, use the space, and leave, often without a second thought about the attendants who make it all happen. You are the invisible force behind their pleasure, yet you are never acknowledged. The bathers will never know your name, never realize that you're the one who made sure the water was just the right temperature for their comfort. They'll never see the subtle touch you gave their oils, or the extra attention you paid to their needs when no one else was watching. As you help carry the basket toward the shade of a storage hut, you glance at a row of older scrolls resting in a carved cedar box. They've darkened with age, the papyrus yellowed, brittle, whispery. You get the feeling that if you sneezed too hard, you'd lose a few dynasties, but the magic is there. Hidden in the weave, in the texture, in the faint echoing voices of people who pressed reeds into shape with the same weary hands and the same weird jokes about scarab beetles doing paperwork. And now, here you are, part of that lineage. From marsh to mat to manuscript, you followed the whole chain, and you didn't even get eaten by a hippo. At least not yet. You spend the morning tucked beneath a canopy of woven reeds, shaded from the unforgiving sun, watching scrolls dry like sunbathing lizards. But now, a change of pace. You're called to follow the papyrus as it makes its way to the real heart of ancient papermaking, the scribe's quarters. This is where your humble scrolls either get transformed into vessels of immortal thought, or brutally rejected for having too many bubbles. You carry a fresh bundle under one arm, dodging geese and small children, until you reach a low mud brick building that smells like ink, sandalwood, and a bit like someone hasn't aired it out since the reign of Thutmose III. Inside, the walls are decorated with samples of writing, prayers, tax ledgers, and what may be the earliest passive-aggressive letter ever written. If you don't send the barley by sundown, my goats will eat your fence again. A scribe greets you with a sniff and a scrutinizing gaze. He's wearing a linen kilt and an expression that says, "I'm deeply annoyed, but somehow also bored." You know the type. He unrolls one of your papyrus sheets with the care of someone inspecting ancient treasure, or at least looking for a reason to complain. He runs his hand along the surface, tilts it in the light, even sniffs it. "This one's fine," he mutters, sounding disappointed not to find a flaw. You don't get a medal or anything, but he gestures toward a low workbench, which feels like a victory. Around the room, other scribes are hunched over their own scrolls, dipping thin reed pens into shallow palettes of black and red ink. The air is filled with the scratchy rhythm of writing, interrupted occasionally by muttered curses when someone smudges a perfectly good line of hieratic script. Papyrus, it turns out, was the unsung MVP of ancient literacy. It didn't just help Egypt. It carried its influence into Greece, Rome, and beyond. The reason we know so much about ancient history Half of it's because someone had a decent piece of papyrus to write on. You settle near the corner and watch the scribes work. Their pens, cut from the same papyrus you helped prepare, have tapered ends softened by chewing. Yes, chewing. Apparently, the ancient secret to good calligraphy was spit. Historians still argue whether this improved ink absorption, or if it was just an occupational hazard of working 8 hours a day with only flatbread for lunch. The ink is made from soot mixed with water and a bit of gum arabic. Black for body text, red for headings, warnings, or the occasional divine name. There's a quiet elegance to it. No shouting, just graceful swirls of ink on plant skin. The scrolls absorb it without smearing. Proof that your papyrus passed the test. You can't help but feel a little proud. You, too, have helped preserve a complaint about grain taxes for eternity. A young apprentice scribes a training exercise, writing the same line over and over. Ra is the sun. Ra is the sun. You wonder if he's learning or just being punished. Nearby, a more experienced scribe finishes a letter to the overseer of the granary and seals it with a bit of clay. They'll roll up the scroll and tie it with a flax string, marking it with the sender's name, early Egyptian sender ID, if you will. Scrolls are sorted into baskets labeled by purpose: religious, administrative, personal. The temple scrolls are particularly ornate, sometimes including colored illustrations or gilded borders. There's even one painted with a diagram of the human body, labeling mysterious parts like the channel of breath and that which makes the feet move. You help stack finished scrolls into clay jars lined with linen to keep out moisture and bugs. Some jars are sealed with wax and a scribe's stamp, an extra layer of security for sensitive information, like troop movements, or which priest keeps stealing extra honey cakes. One jar nearby contains a papyrus from the time of Ramses II, still readable after over 1,000 years. You touch it lightly. It feels impossibly thin, impossibly strong. That's the strange paradox of papyrus. It's fragile when wet, yet near immortal when dry and protected. Like a cat, but with better handwriting. A few of the older scribes talk shop in the corner, sipping from small cups of date wine and debating scroll length. One insists the perfect scroll is 12 cubits long. Any shorter and you look cheap. Any longer and no one finishes reading it. Another disagrees, citing a recently recovered 20-cubit scroll full of funeral instructions and mystical maps. They argue about it like modern screenwriters arguing over runtime. One scribe leans toward you and says, "You know, the great library in Alexandria, when it was still full, had hundreds of thousands of scrolls, all on papyrus, a forest of thoughts." Then he sighs, and most of it, gone. Fire doesn't care how neat your handwriting is. You nod slowly. That's the catch, isn't it? even the best papyrus can't withstand every disaster. Time, fire, moisture, all enemies of written memory. But that's why the act of making it matters. Every scroll is a defiance of forgetting. The sun begins to lower, casting golden stripes across the scribe's quarters. You help secure the jars for delivery, tying them shut and stacking them into reed-woven carriers. The journey ahead will be dusty and dangerous. Bandits, weather, the occasional goat-bushy uprising. But once a scroll leaves here, it's out of your hands and into histories. You linger for a moment, hand resting on one sealed jar, feeling the warmth still trapped inside. Somewhere, far in the future, someone might unroll this, squint at the ink, and try to make sense of the life you've touched. Then you turn, stretching your sore back, and step out into the twilight, already dreaming of your next bundle of reed stalks and the 1,000-year potential hidden within their fibrous hearts. The Nile shifts restlessly overnight, and by morning it's already started to rise, licking at the edges of the embankment like a hungry cat. It's a sign, not of doom, though it does mean you'll have to keep your sandals out of the mud. It's a signal that the season of transport has begun, when papyrus scrolls are bundled loaded and sent floating off toward temples, treasuries, and sometimes even the palace itself. You blink away sleep and follow a narrow footpath down to the river, where a low wooden skiff bobs gently at its mooring. It's about as luxurious as a warped picnic bench with a sail. But don't judge. It's about to carry precious cargo. The boatmen are already at work, their robes hitched above the knee, their skin dusted with dried reeds and river spray. One of them raises an eyebrow at your approach and gestures for the scroll jars. You haul them carefully, 2 at a time, balancing their fragile weight as if you were carrying ancient gossip, which, to be fair, you kind of are. You place them in the center of the skiff, between woven mats and goatskin sacks of provisions. The scribe you met yesterday is already seated under a papyrus canopy, looking smug and mildly seasick, like someone deeply committed to their profession but allergic to boats. Once the last jar is stowed and the ropes untied, the skiff pushes off with a soft scrape. The river accepts it like it's greeting an old friend, and soon you're drifting northward with the current, past the lush banks where white egrets stalk frogs and children shout as they herd stubborn cattle. Traveling by boat is the ancient Egyptian equivalent of taking the freeway. Only this freeway has crocodiles and occasionally floods entire villages. You keep an eye out, just in case a scaly head breaks the surface nearby. Not because it's likely, but because it would be a spectacularly embarrassing way to end your paper-making career. The Nile is more than a river. It's the great conveyor belt of Egyptian civilization. Everything moves on it. Grain, fish, soldiers, gossip, and now, thanks to you, freshly pressed scrolls. The breeze pushes gently at the sail as the boat glides past thickets of reeds and the occasional burial mound crumbling in the distance like a forgotten cake. As you pass through smaller towns along the way, people gather on the banks to wave or shout jokes. One man gestures at your cargo and yells, "Tell the vizier to lower taxes," followed by hearty laughter. Another calls out, "Send us more wine scrolls," which you suspect is a joke, but honestly wouldn't mind checking. The scribe beside you grumbles as he unties one of the jars and examines a scroll, muttering about humidity and improper sealing techniques. You offer him a date from your pouch and he accepts it like it's a bribe. These scrolls, he says between chews, might be destined for Pir Bastet. Temple records, priestly correspondence, that kind of thing. You nod as if you fully understand, which, to be fair, you mostly do. Pir Bastet, city of the cat goddess, has temples that house not just worshippers and mummified felines, but also scriptoriums, where scrolls are copied, studied, and occasionally argued over with impressive passive aggression. There's something oddly humbling about floating down this ancient highway with a boat full of future knowledge. You imagine the scrolls being unrolled in candlelit chambers, the rustle of papyrus mixing with murmurs of astonishment or bureaucratic disappointment. Oh no, not another barley inventory list. But here's a twist you didn't expect. Not every scroll is headed for use. Some are meant to be buried. Yes, really. Tombs often included texts written on papyrus, from hymns and spells to detailed guides on how to navigate the afterlife without being eaten by snake-headed crocodiles. Historians still argue whether these funerary texts were tailored specifically for the dead or if they were just reusing generic templates. A sort of cosmic choose-your-own-adventure cheat sheet. You think back to the drying racks and your careful trimming. One of those scrolls might someday sit beside a mummy, bundled in linen and prayers, waiting to whisper directions to a soul in the dark. Step 1. Avoid the lake of fire. Step 2. Flatter Osiris. A lot midday heat turns the river into molten silver, and your eyelids start drooping. The rhythmic splash of oars is hypnotic, as is the soft thump of the boat against passing reeds. Even the scribe seems to nod off, scroll half unrolled in his lap, head bobbing like a sleepy ibis. Then, bump. The boat scrapes against a hidden sandbar and lurches to one side. A jar tips dangerously close to the edge, but you manage to catch it just in time, heart thudding like a war drum. The boatman grins without apologizing. "Crocodiles eat the clumsy ones," he says. Charming. Eventually, you pull into a dock at a mid-sized village known for its granaries and remarkably nosy cats. Workers help unload the cargo, carrying the scroll jars toward a low-walled structure with a lotus carving above the entrance, the local temple. You walk alongside them, scrolls in hand, feeling less like a delivery person and more like an escort to royalty. Inside, the high priest accepts the shipment with an approving nod. He lifts the seal on one jar and pulls out a scroll, his fingers moving with reverence and experience. "This one," he says quietly, "will be placed in the shrine of Bastet for preservation." you resist the urge to ask if the cats will be doing the reading. As the workers unload the last jar, you take one final look at the boat rocking gently at the dock. Soon, it'll return for another shipment. Maybe more scrolls, maybe food, maybe someone with a stronger stomach than your seasick scribe. But for now, your role in the great papyrus journey has ended here. You've carried the plant from marsh to mat, to scroll, to temple, and in doing so, you've followed a path trodden by thousands before you. Silent hands, gentle work, and the hope that words, once written, might last longer than stone. You turn to leave as the priest lights incense and begins to chant softly. Behind him, cats watch with half-closed eyes, clearly impressed. The next morning, your joints are still stiff from the boat ride, but your mind's buzzing with the quiet thrill of yesterday's delivery. Most people don't get to say they've helped shepherd sacred scrolls into the paws of temple cats. But before your ego inflates too much, you're reminded, gently but firmly, that Papyrus is never a one-person show. There's another vital piece in this scroll-to-temple puzzle: the archivists. You make your way to a tucked-away chamber near the rear of the temple complex, where the air is cool and smells like old linen, sandalwood, and possibly a hint of ancient dust bunny. This is the archive, a storage space not of food or fabric, but of minds. You step inside and are immediately greeted by an endless parade of clay jars, stone cubbies, and reed baskets, all stuffed with scrolls, all carefully labeled. Some labels are crisp, painted in neat hieratic script. Others are nearly faded to nothing. One even appears to have been rewritten 3 times, with each successive archivist crossing out the last one's name like a petty papyrus duel. Historians still argue whether certain archives were maintained solely by priests or if lay scribes also had access. Either way, you're about to see the heart of written memory in motion. A short, wiry woman greets you. She's dressed in faded linen, hair tightly braided, and looks like she hasn't blinked since the reign of Amenhotep. She gives you a once-over and says, "New scrolls?" You nod. She gestures for you to follow, weaving between towering shelves as if the scrolls themselves whisper directions only she can hear. Archivists, it turns out, aren't just glorified librarians. They're curators of civilization. Your guide explains how each scroll must be examined, registered, and if deemed worthy, assigned a cubby. Not everything gets kept, she says flatly, holding up a half-torn sheet that appears to be someone's very dramatic breakup letter. We are not a gossip depot. Still, for every melodramatic papyrus, there's something astonishing. Grain counts from dynasties long gone, medical texts detailing spells for snake bites, letters from generals boasting about victories they may or may not have actually won. You hold one such scroll, a petition to the temple gods from a man claiming his neighbor cursed his donkey. The archivist rolls her eyes. That one gets copied a lot, very popular among students. You watch as she performs the intake ritual. First, the scroll is unrolled halfway and checked for mold, tears, or, brace yourself, worm damage. Next, she weighs it. Yes, weighs it. The heft can hint at whether someone added extra layers or used a heavier papyrus batch. She then runs a thin reed across the fibers, listening to the sound it makes. Apparently, a clean papyrus hums slightly. You don't hear anything, but she nods like it just told her a secret. Finally, she inscribes a record on a master tablet. The scroll gets its own clay tag, marked with a small glyph denoting category and origin. Then, and only then, it earns a home in the archive's cool shadows. You help stack a few of the older scrolls into fresh containers, lining each jar with linen to protect against humidity. She points out a few oddities along the way. A scroll believed to be cursed, though to be fair, it's just poorly written. One with an unusual blue ink that may have been imported from the Levant, and another that details a solar eclipse down to the hour, though no one can agree if it's actual astronomy or the world's most dramatic weather report. By midday, you're sitting cross-legged on a straw mat, helping organize an inventory list. Your job? Read aloud the titles while the archivist cross-references the tags. Some of the titles are deeply serious. Instructions for the weighing of the heart. List of cattle owed to the god Ptah. Offerings for the festival of the valley. Others are a little more unexpected. Why my brother is a fool, for instance. Or a catalog of good fish and their weaknesses. You're not entirely sure that last one's real, but it's beautifully inked and comes with a small drawing of an unimpressed tilapia. Occasionally, a priest stops by to request a specific scroll. One asks for a copy of the Book of Caverns, an obscure underworld text. Another requests a hymn scroll, then complains that the last version used the wrong version of the second stanza. You get the sense that ancient Egypt was full of strong editorial opinions. The archivist doesn't just hand things out. Each scroll must be signed for, sealed for travel, and returned within a set period, or risk temple disfavor. Last moon cycle, someone kept the ledger scroll for 10 extra days, she mutters, shaking her head. We sent them 5 cats and a warning. You can't tell if she's joking. That afternoon, you help prepare a scroll for burial. Yes, another burial. This time, it's for a wealthy merchant who requested 3 things: his ledger to impress the gods, a love letter from his wife, adorable, and a prayer scroll for safe passage. The archivist selects clean copies of each, ties them with dyed flax cords, and wraps them in linen soaked in myrrh. You watch as they're sealed in a jar and marked with a funerary glyph. It's strangely touching. The man won't take gold, silver, or food into the afterlife, but he'll take words. The day winds down. The sun filters through the high slits in the mud brick walls, casting golden stripes across the floor. The air is still, reverent. Somewhere nearby, A hymn echoes through the temple halls. You run your fingers along a stack of tightly packed jars, imagining the words inside them. Some will survive centuries, others may crumble before the next flood. But all of them, every scribbled line, every smudged ink stroke, once mattered to someone. You step outside into the warm hush of dusk, papyrus dust still clinging to your sleeves. You've seen how the scrolls are made, delivered, and now archived. But there's still more ahead. Papyrus isn't just a medium, it's a mirror. It holds dreams, taxes, poetry, petty squabbles, divine wisdom. And you're now part of its story. The moon rises, fat and glowing over the Nile that night, casting ripples of light across the water like scattered silver coins. You can still smell the faint resin of temple incense clinging to your tunic as you make your way back toward the village. But you're not going to rest just yet, not when you've heard about something that sounds far too tempting to miss. The Papyrus Exchange Market. Yes, it's real. It's not some dusty stall where someone trades fish for sandals. This is the quiet hub of scribal culture, the place where surplus scrolls, fresh sheets, and rare finds trade hands like gossip at a royal banquet. It's also where reputations are made or permanently smeared, often with ink. The market isn't flashy. It's more of a courtyard, tucked behind a workshop, scattered with reed mats and low tables. Lanterns swing gently from posts, casting warm, sleepy light over scrolls spread out like fine linen. Scribes, merchants, and the occasional nosy priest mingle in soft conversation. You step inside and immediately feel like you've entered an exclusive club, but instead of robes and rings, their status is written in calligraphy. An older man, hunched and wide-eyed like a scholarly owl, motions you over. He's unrolling a piece of papyrus that looks almost translucent with age. "Real sycamore ink," he whispers reverently. "Still smells like the gods." You lean closer, and sure enough, it smells. Kind of like wet tree bark and old figs. Sacred? Maybe. Strange? Definitely. Across from him, a woman is haggling over a batch of fresh papyrus sheets. She's waving one in the air like a prized fan. "The fiber alignment is off," she insists. "Do you think I can write a royal poem on this? It's practically a mat." The vendor shrugs, utterly unbothered. "Your words will straighten it out." It's oddly thrilling, this space. Scrolls being bartered like wine or wheat. You spot a trade in progress. One high-quality funerary spell sheet for 2 shipping manifests and a scratched-out love poem that allegedly belonged to someone's aunt. That last one is being traded mostly for the gossip. There's a lot of whispering about which workshops produce the best fiber. The consensus tonight favors a marsh south of Memphis, whose papyrus is said to be so smooth it makes your reed pen weep with joy. Historians still argue whether regional papyrus differences were officially recorded or just passed down in whispered networks like this one. Either way, reputation matters. You slide closer to a table where a new batch of raw papyrus sheets is being laid out. They're weighed, tapped, and even sniffed by potential buyers. You try it too, out of curiosity. It smells faintly of river water, sun, and the kind of effort that makes your back sore. Familiar. As you watch the negotiations, you realize just how complex this trade is. Quality varies wildly, not just because of plant fiber, but also because of who processed it. Some sheets are thick and hardy, meant for shipping records or tax audits. Others are delicate, nearly silken, saved for holy text, poetry, or legal documents where presentation equals power. You overhear a debate between two scribes over ink compatibility. One swears by crushed carbon soot mixed with gum Arabic. Basic, sturdy, holds up well. The other insists on red ochre for its vibrancy, though admits it tends to flake in humidity. Their argument sounds like a love letter to pigments. Somewhere nearby, a third person just shrugs and says, "I use both. Depends if I'm writing a blessing or a curse." The truth is, this marketplace doesn't just trade materials, it trades culture. You notice someone unfurling a scroll filled with jokes and riddles. Yes, ancient dad jokes. A few are still funny. How do you annoy a hippo? Offer him sandals. Okay, maybe not hilarious, but enough to draw a snort from a nearby apprentice. A boy hovers nearby with a bundle under his arm, clearly trying to get someone, anyone, to glance his way. You catch his eye and give a nod. He brightens instantly and rushes over, unfurling a handful of beginner scribe practice sheets. Lines waver. Glyphs are squished. One line of text is completely upside down. But he's proud, and you nod again, this time more seriously. It reminds you of how it all starts. Bad ink, trembling fingers, and a desire to be remembered. The marketplace is also where rare texts surface. One man carefully reveals a scroll written in Demotic, less formal than hieratic, more commonly used for contracts, letters, and everyday chatter. The scroll recounts a neighborhood dispute involving a runaway goat, 3 broken jars, and an alleged insult involving someone's mother and a fishmonger. It's basically a sitcom in papyrus form. You learn that sometimes damaged scrolls are traded for their components. A ruined scroll might be cut up, the blank margins trimmed and reused for notes or small lists. This kind of recycling isn't uncommon, especially in lean years. Waste not, want not, even if it means some priest ends up writing a tax formula in the corner of an old breakup letter. There's a theory, still debated naturally, that many household spell scrolls were written on reused temple fragments, which makes you wonder what kind of luck you get when your amulet spell shares space with a grain delivery invoice. As the night deepens, the pace of bartering slows. The lanterns flicker lower, voices quiet, and the crowd thins. You sit on the edge of the market, watching someone roll up a newly purchased scroll like they've just bought a rare gem. And maybe they have. You think of the hands that pressed the papyrus, the ink that flowed, the meaning laid gently down stroke by stroke. This market is more than a place of trade. It's a living scroll of its own. One that records the pulse of scribes, priests, merchants, and apprentices. The papyrus made here doesn't just travel, it evolves. And tonight, you've seen how it changes hands and hearts. You make your way out under the stars, the warmth of lantern light still clinging to your thoughts. Tomorrow, perhaps, you'll see how all these traded sheets become something even greater. But for now, let your eyes rest. You've walked through the paper trail of the gods. The sun rises again over the Nile, burning softly through the morning mist, as if even it isn't quite ready to wake up. Your sandals brush through dew-slick reeds as you make your way downriver to a place that's less glamorous than a temple, quieter than a marketplace, and somehow just as vital, a private household. That's right. Today, it's time to discover how papyrus finds its way into everyday Egyptian homes. You might imagine papyrus is only for priests, kings, and scribes with robes wider than moonlight. But no, papyrus lives in the homes of farmers, bakers, and even that guy down the road who still owes everyone beer from the last harvest festival. You arrive at a modest mud brick home, its courtyard shaded by a woven reed canopy. The air is heavy with the scent of bread baking in a clay oven and, less charmingly, the unmistakable smell of goats. But tucked beside all this domestic normalcy is a small writing station, a low wooden bench, a chipped ink palette, and a roll of papyrus tied with a reed string. Your host is a matriarch named Neferet, a widow with 3 children, a wicked sense of humor, and an apparent disdain for losing things, hence her fondness for keeping written lists. She greets you while swatting a chicken off her doorstep. You're here for the scrolls? Try not to trip over my life. You sit cross-legged beside her as she unfurls a modest but respectable collection of household papyri. The first is a monthly ledger, sacks of barley in, loaves of bread out, jars of beer accounted for with religious care. She chuckles, pointing to a smudge where one entry was scribbled out. That's when I caught my brother sneaking an extra jug. I wrote, mysteriously vanished. It's immediately clear. Papyrus isn't a luxury item here. It's functional, utilitarian. These are scraps mostly, narrow sheets, reused margins, sometimes even the papyrus equivalent of sticky notes glued on with old gum resin. The writing varies in style and legibility. Her daughter's handwriting, still clumsy and over-inked, sits beside a careful note in the hand of Neferet's late husband. Historians still argue whether lower-class families typically owned papyrus or borrowed access from scribes. What's becoming clearer, though, is that people like Neferet weren't just passive recipients of scribal culture. They were participants, writing, recording, sometimes doodling when the day dragged on. Neferet explains how she barters for her papyrus sheets with a traveling scribe who passes through twice a season. I give him pickled onions and good gossip. He gives me leftovers from his commissions. I get the margins, but they're mine. She's proud of this deal, and honestly, it's kind of genius. You spot one particularly strange sheet in the stack. It's marked with small figures, stick people really, each holding something different, a pot, a loaf, a goat. That's my son's story scroll, she says. He was sick for 3 days, bored stiff, drew his whole dream about feeding bread to Anubis. You smile. Ancient Egyptian comic books, not far off. Another papyrus holds a letter she wrote to her cousin across the river. It's folded carefully and sealed with a thumbprint of hardened beeswax. He never replied, she mutters, probably illiterate. Still, the act of writing was itself an expression of care. The script is slow, deliberate, and inked with that earnest seriousness only family drama deserves. She pulls out one final scroll, a prayer. It's older, ink faded to brown, edges frayed. My mother's, she says quietly, for protection mostly. We keep it in the bread jar. That way, we remember it every day. You imagine generations of hands brushing past that papyrus each morning, mixing reverence with flour. Of course, not every household used papyrus for such touching purposes. One boy from next door runs up to borrow a sheet, not for prayers, but for keeping score in a game involving stones, sandals, and an alarming amount of shouting. You hand him a crinkled scrap, and he tears off a corner without hesitation. There goes ancient history, sacrificed for sibling rivalry. Still, it's remarkable how far-reaching papyrus is. Even in homes with no official scribes, people find ways to mark time, track chores, vent about relatives, and capture memories, one ink line at a time. Some scrolls are reused as binding for sandals. Others are pressed into amulets or tucked into ceiling beams to keep the snakes out. Don't ask how that works. It's probably a long story involving 2 cats and a misinterpreted proverb. The afternoon heat rises, and Neferet offers you a seat under the canopy where she's writing out the guest list for a coming feast. If I don't write it down, she sighs, I'll forget someone, and then they'll curse my stew. She gestures for you to help. You try copying a few names, but fumble the glyph for Uncle Teddy. She peers over and snorts. That's the sign for potato, not uncle. Close enough, right? You also learn how families store their papyri. Not in fancy jars or carved niches, but in bundles tied with string, hung from hooks, or even pressed flat under baskets. One scroll is kept in a clay jug by the door. That's the recipe for headache beer, not for children. There's a kind of rhythm to household writing. Quick notes before sunrise, prayers whispered into ink, tally marks scratched in by candlelight. It's not formal. It's not always pretty, but it's personal. You begin to realize this is how memory survives. Outside of monuments and tombs, in kitchens, in gossip, in scribbled complaints about who broke the goat fence. Just before sunset, Neferet shows you a tiny papyrus square, and nailed above the doorway. On it, a single glyph. Enough. She laughs. My daily mantra. Probably a more universal one than any pharaoh ever decreed. You walk away that evening with ink-stained fingers and a new understanding. Papyrus didn't only live in palaces and in temples. It lived in daily lives, in arguments, shopping lists, bedtime stories, and hopes inked softly under breath. So much of what survives from ancient Egypt is grand, gold-lined, and God-haunted. But here, in this humble home, Papyrus reminds you of something smaller and just as sacred. The miracle of remembering, even when no one's watching. Evening winds stir the dust as you follow a long, creaking cart, bound for one of Egypt's more somber but deeply fascinating papyrus destinations, the local bureaucracy. Yes, you're heading straight into the papyrus-padded jaws of the ancient Egyptian administrative system. It might not sound glamorous, but hold your eye rolls. This is where some of the most impressive papyrus use comes into play. And don't pretend you've never wanted to peek into the pharaoh's paperwork pile. You arrive at a low, sun-baked building near the edge of town. It looks like a hybrid between a fortress, a closet, and your least favorite teacher's office. Stone walls, narrow slits for windows, and the ever-present aroma of ink, sweat, and barley beer. This is the records office, a vital hub where scribes spend long days hunched over desks, capturing the beating heart of the state, one labor tally and tax log at a time. You step inside, and it's immediately overwhelming. Papyrus is everywhere, stacked in shelves, tied in bundles, rolled into jars, even tucked into the crevices of statues like the ancient Egyptian version of sticky notes. A junior scribe nearly walks into you, muttering about barley quotas and mutinous donkeys. A senior official, stooped like a temple beam but sharp-eyed as a hawk, waves you over. You here to learn? He says without waiting for a reply. Then sit down and don't touch anything sticky. Sage advice. You nestle onto a woven mat and watch the bureaucratic ballet unfold. One scribe is copying out a land transfer document, carefully detailing which plots of soil-rich land by the Nile now belong to which son, and how much grain each must pay in tax. These contracts are written on narrow papyrus sheets, designed for clarity and easy storage. Not that easy is the word you'd use looking at the overflowing amphorae full of rolled scrolls. A fringe fact for your mental archives. Some of these papyrus documents weren't stored flat or in stacks, but rather wound into spirals and kept in pottery jars. This not only preserved them from mice, but added a weirdly dramatic flair to document retrieval. Imagine someone asking for their land lease and a scribe cracking open a jar. like it's an ancient fortune cookie. One of the most intriguing uses of papyrus here is the daily work journal. A scroll you're shown today covers an entire month from a limestone quarry. It records which laborers showed up, who was late, who claimed they were sick, and who mysteriously vanished just before tax season. Some entries even include snide side notes. Beckenmuth claims to be suffering from head cold, was drinking date beer. Apparently passive-aggressive scribes were already a thing. Historians still argue whether such notes were official add-ons or just the scribes entertaining themselves. The paperwork here tracks everything: animal births, grain storage levels, theft investigations, and workforce rations down to the last bread loaf. You read one sheet detailing a shipment of 200 baskets of lentils with a line at the bottom, 3 baskets eaten en route by driver and companion. Not punished, just noted. Brutally honest logistics. Scribes sit cross-legged with their pallets balanced on knee-high desks, dipping fine-tipped reeds into cakes of carbon black or red ochre. The black is for standard entries. The red for corrections, headings, or just scolding someone in style. You watch as a young apprentice practices a fine red title at the top of a scroll: Grain Disbursement, Year of the Flood. He botches it halfway through and lets out a soft groan. His supervisor sighs and reaches for a fresh sheet. Again, without the drama this time. There's an unspoken hierarchy here. Master scribes handle sensitive legal scrolls, inheritances, royal orders, diplomatic letters. Apprentices stick to supply tallies, minor complaints, and practice drafts. You spot one scribe shaking his scroll like a rug to dry the ink faster. Risky, bold, and the exact moment he smudges a figure 8 into what now looks like a donkey's face. Oops. Interestingly, some bureaucratic papyri are written in 2 languages, hieratic and demotic, especially during the late period. This bilingual practice ensured broader understanding across the increasingly diverse population. One scroll here even has a section written in Greek. To impress the inspector, the old scribe mutters. Didn't work. He was Roman. You wonder how these scribes keep everything straight. The answer? Tags. Tiny tags. Papyrus fragments tied to the scrolls with string identify their contents. It's an early form of filing, except instead of folders, you have baskets and jars labeled like taxes, North District, grain loans, camel theft complaints. That last one has a surprisingly full basket. Some papyrus documents are sealed with small clay impressions, bearing the mark of the scribe or official. Breaking the seal to peek inside before delivery? Big no-no. As serious as stealing mail today, maybe worse. Ancient gossip suggests that one scribe lost 3 fingers for leaking a military food report. Maybe apocryphal, but it certainly encourages careful ink work. Amid the sea of scrolls, a curious document catches your eye. A petition. A farmer is pleading for tax relief after his crops failed due to a freak river eel infestation. His handwriting is shaky, the wording desperate. The document is marked in red, review pending. You ask what happened. The old scribe shrugs. Probably got reviewed when the eels learned to file counterclaims. Not all administrative writing stays here, though. Many scrolls get copied, then sent upstream or downstream to regional governors. Sometimes, identical papyrus sheets are sent in triplicate. One for the local archive, one for transport, and one for the royal court. It's the ancient answer to CCing someone. And you thought email chains were annoying. You spend the rest of the day shadowing scribes as they move like human printers from one scroll to another. There's a rhythm, a music in their movements. Read, pen, tap, scroll, roll, seal, press, deep sigh. Repeat. When the sun sinks behind the buildings, casting long shadows over the dusty shelves, the scribes slowly begin to stretch, crack their backs, and carefully wrap their scrolls in linen sleeves. You leave the office behind with a newfound respect for the invisible machinery of ancient Egyptian life. These weren't just documents. They were living systems. Contracts that governed peace, prayers disguised as petitions, and checklists that decided who ate and who didn't. And at the heart of it all, Papyrus, ever patient, ever flexible, and just a little judgmental when smudged. The sun is barely up when you're nudged awake by the smell of smoke and a faint, rhythmic humming, low, steady, like the distant thump of a loom. Today, you're following the Papyrus Trail to a place most visitors never think to visit. The temples not as religious sanctuaries, but as knowledge vaults. Because long before dusty museums or Google Docs, ancient Egyptians were already archiving humanity's thoughts in temples built like fortresses and scroll rooms stacked like memory palaces. You begin at the outer courtyard of a local temple, its stone columns towering above you like silent giants. Priests bustle about in white linen robes, some hauling water for purification rituals, others carrying armfuls of, yes, bundles of papyrus, not gold, not incense, papyrus. In this sacred space, scrolls are more prized than relics. You step inside. Temples, it turns out, are less about fire and brimstone speeches and more about record keeping. That's right, your average Egyptian temple is also an administrative hub, a research center, and a papyrus scribbling frenzy of divine paperwork. Who knew? Your first stop is the House of Life, or Per Ankh, a hidden room behind the inner sanctum. Don't let the cozy name fool you. This place is serious. The walls are lined with tall niches, each cradling sealed scroll jars, while a low wooden desk sits in the center beneath an open skylight. It smells like ink and wisdom, and maybe a little bit like dried fish, but you're trying not to dwell on that. This is where sacred knowledge is stored. Hymns, astronomical charts, medical scrolls, and spells copied over centuries. You run your hand gently along one worn jar, its faded tag reading something like, "Cure for burning in the belly." Charming. Historians still argue whether every temple had its own per ankh, or if only major religious centers like Karnak and Abydos house these elite scriptoria. Either way, being admitted here means you're in the presence of something rare, written magic. You watch as a priest scribe, head shaven, robe spotless, unrolls a scroll on a stone slab. It's a lunar calendar, annotated in red for sacred feasts and eclipses. Each glyph is inked with obsessive precision, and he chants softly as he writes, "To bind the mind and the hand," he murmurs. You wonder if he means the spell, the scroll, or just trying not to mess up again after that last ink spill. Some scrolls are poetic, lyrical even. You're shown one titled The Teaching of a Menemope, a kind of ancient self-help guide packed with moral advice and life hacks like, "Do not be greedy, or your belly will swell and burst." Ancient guess Egyptians really knew how to land message. There are also astronomical papyri here, detailed charts of star movements, lunar phases, and predictions for the best days to plant, harvest, or attempt to win an argument with your in-laws. You imagine generations of priests looking up at the same sky, their heads full of ink and moonlight. A quirky scroll catches your eye. What appears to be a dream manual. That's right, ancient Egyptians wrote down dreams and interpreted them on papyrus. If you dream of drinking warm beer, it means good fortune, the priest says with a wink. If you dream of crocodiles wearing hats, well, consult a magician. You help roll up one scroll with careful fingers. It crinkles softly, like an old leaf. The priest smiles. Knowledge must be kept alive, even in dreams. He gestures to a locked cabinet at the far wall. Inside are the most sacred scrolls, those containing divine names, protective spells, and possibly instructions for navigating the afterlife without getting eaten by a giant snake. That last part may or may not be a scholarly guess. While most temple scrolls are religious, many double as practical manuals. Medical papyri detail surgical procedures, ingredients for healing pastes, and occasionally wildly questionable remedies. You read one that suggests crocodile fat as a cure for back pain. Bold and smelly. Still, it's clear these scrolls matter deeply. When temples were looted during invasions, priests often smuggled the papyri out first, sometimes more urgently than their own gold. And why not? These texts were believed to hold the voice of the gods, the formulae of creation itself. Some scrolls are written in dazzling calligraphy, others in quick, scrawled script. One priest grins as he shows you a text that mixes both. "Apprentice's first draft," he says. "He started like Thoth, ended like a chicken with a cramp." Poor kid. You're allowed to observe a small training session. Novice scribes hunched over fresh sheets of papyrus, repeating sacred passages again and again. No erasing allowed. You mess up, You start over. The ink-stained hands and furrowed brows tell the story. Fringe fact of the day. Some temples kept backup scrolls buried in hidden chambers, sealed in clay and guarded by curses, just in case someone lost the originals. That's right. Ancient Egyptians invented version control and booby traps in one breath. Outside the scroll room, the temple is abuzz with rituals. But even during offerings and incense burning, you see a priest consulting a small slip of papyrus tucked into his belt. It's a schedule. Yes, even divine ceremonies needed bullet points. Somewhere out there is a scroll titled, "How Not to Anger the Gods Before Lunch." As you make your way back through the columns, you notice a wall carving showing a figure holding a scroll toward a seated deity. To offer words is to offer life, your guide says quietly. And you realize papyrus wasn't just a tool here. It was a bridge between human minds and the divine, between breath and eternity. By nightfall, the House of Life is quiet again. The jars are sealed. The desk is clean. A fresh sheet of papyrus waits under the moonlight for tomorrow's hand. You leave with the gentle realization that while temples may crumble and gods fall silent, the words etched on papyrus have outlasted them all. Whispered spells, careful records, and the oldest forms of wonder, wrapped in reeds and ink. The path away from the temple leads you downstream, through soft marsh grass and over warm, creaking footbridges. You're headed somewhere quieter today, though no less important. Papyrus, it turns out, wasn't reserved just for priests and bureaucrats. It also belonged to poets, lovers, and people with opinions. Welcome to the domestic side of ancient Egyptian writing. Letters, doodles, family drama, and the earliest form of just checking in texts ever scribbled. You duck into a modest mud brick house along the riverbank. It's simple. A central room, a few sleeping mats, pots of lentils cooling in the corner. But on one shelf, half hidden behind a bowl of dates, sits a small worn roll of papyrus tied with twine. You untie it gently. It's not a spell or a tax form. It's a letter written in a flowing, almost playful hand. And it starts like this: "To my beloved Satsubek, may the gods watch your footsteps." You pause. A love letter, inked in black with a little flourish on the name. No grand proclamations, just updates about a goat that ran off, a neighbor who keeps borrowing beer, and a wish for Satsubek to come home before the new moon. It's adorable, relatable, and a little smudged at the bottom, as if someone had wept just a bit over the page. You learn quickly that papyrus letters were a real thing, even among those who weren't wealthy. Literate Egyptians, and there were more than you'd expect, used papyrus for everyday correspondence when they could afford it. For more casual use, they'd switch to potsherds or limestone flakes called ostraca. But the good stuff? Papyrus was for when it really mattered. Inside another house, you're shown a stash of rolled up scrolls, some sealed with wax, others tied with string. These are household records, lists of tools, debts owed, dowries promised. One scroll includes a full inventory of a wedding chest, 2 linen tunics, 1 bronze mirror, 5 jars of date wine, 1 sassy cat. Okay, the cat's implied. You spot one papyrus with a little cartoon doodle in the margin. A man chasing what might be a very smug goose. The scribe who shows it to you just shrugs. Long meetings, he says. And suddenly, you feel a deep kinship across 4,000 years. Historians still argue whether these scribbled additions were inside jokes or ritual additions. But either way, they're deeply human. Among the stacks is a letter from a soldier stationed far from home. His handwriting is stiffer, more deliberate, and you can almost hear his voice in the words. Tell my son I miss him. Tell my wife to save me a jar of her lentil stew. He adds, my sandals are ruined. Send new ones. Priorities. Even papyrus scraps have a story. You're handed a piece torn from a larger scroll. On it, half a sentence about fishing nets and what looks like a shopping list. Fish, onions, ink, sandals, all the essentials. It's tempting to imagine someone scribbling it down in a rush before heading to market. Quirky fact: there are papyrus letters written in verse, rhymed love poems exchanged between scribes and their sweethearts. One reads, my heart sails to you like a reed boat upon sweet wine. You can't tell if it's romantic or if he just really liked metaphors. Maybe both. Papyrus wasn't just a tool of romance and shopping, though. It was also used to lodge complaints. A woman named Tatafre, you're told, once wrote a formal letter accusing her neighbor of stealing laundry left out to dry. Her scroll ends with, may the gods see your theft and judge you accordingly. Ouch. Ancient burn. You watch as a child dips a small reed pen into watered-down ink, carefully copying the alphabet. The papyrus curls slightly under her hand. Homework, her mother says, amused. She wants to be a temple scribe. You smile. The scroll she's using is clearly reused. The back has a faded laundry list. Recycling. Ancient style. In a village square, you encounter a small gathering. A traveling scribe is writing letters for those who can't write themselves. An old man dictates a message to his daughter in Thebes. A widow asks for a legal copy of her husband's will. The scribe nods patiently, scratching it all out on narrow strips of papyrus, folding each scroll with care. 4 devians for one, 2 for a half scroll, he tells you. Business is brisk. Historians believe some of these everyday scrolls were later used for entirely different purposes. Cut up, rewritten, even pasted into mummy wrappings. Imagine your grocery list ending up as spiritual armor. The layers of reuse blur the line between sacred and mundane. You're shown a scroll that once bore a legal notice, but now carries a child's multiplication table. The math is off, but the effort is earnest. You can almost hear the parent yelling from the corner, Use both sides. We don't grow papyrus in the closet. You notice the texture on some home-use papyrus is rougher, more fibrous, less polished than temple-grade scrolls. It crinkles more. The ink bleeds slightly. But there's a strange beauty in it. Imperfect, but alive. Personal. Messy like life itself. As the sun dips lower, you help one family carefully wrap up their papyrus letters and tuck them into a clay jar sealed with linen and beeswax. Not for mailing, but for memory. For the children, the grandfather says, so they know who we were. You nod, touched. It's a time capsule of laughter, longing, and daily chaos. And somehow, still intact after millennia. You leave the village as stars prick the sky. No scrolls in your hand, but plenty in your heart. The drama, the jokes, the off-key poetry, it's all there. Written not for history, but for each other. And somehow, still whispering. You're back near the edge of the floodplain now, walking along a reed-choked canal. The breeze carries the scent of wet earth, fermented dates, and something smokier. Up ahead, a cluster of homes with blackened chimneys curls wisps of smoke into the evening sky. You're approaching a scribal workshop, one of the places where papyrus wasn't just used, but actively transformed into art, record, and even politics. Because here's the deal, scribes were kind of a big deal. They didn't just write stuff down. They translated spoken commands into bureaucratic muscle, dreams into prayers, and taxes into very real receipts. In a culture where most people couldn't read, scribes held the keys to power. You know, the same way your cousin does with his Wi-Fi password. Inside the workshop, the walls are a mess of half-finished scrolls, baskets of ink cakes, and sharpened reed pens, soaking in little clay jars. A boy is grinding soot and gum resin on a slab, making a fresh batch of black ink. Nearby, an older man is meticulously trimming the frayed edge of a papyrus sheet with a bronze blade. It's more surgery than scribbling. You're handed a blank sheet, still faintly damp, still smelling like river water and sun, and asked to try your hand at a glyph. You pick the owl for no real reason, except owls are cool. Your first attempt looks more like a drunken chicken. Your guide winces but nods politely. Beginner's mark, he says. Translation, yikes. It's in this humble, chaotic space that thousands of administrative documents are born. You leaf through a stack of recent works, inventory scrolls from granaries, legal transcripts, birth records, census tallies. One scroll contains a detailed list of how many workers showed up to build a canal last month. Spoiler, not enough. One entry reads, claimed headache, no witness. Nice try, Horemheb. Here's your mainstream historical fact for the day. The scribal profession wasn't just for men. While rarer, female scribes did exist, particularly within temple complexes and noble households. Some even specialized in medical or ritual texts. Imagine a sassy priestess correcting your spell syntax. No, no. The snake devours the soul after sunrise. Amateurs. Nearby, two scribes are arguing. One insists on using a ceremonial script called hieratic for an official document, while the other wants to use the newer, faster demotic. But it's for the governor. The first hisses. He won't read it. The second counters. He just wants it stamped and pretty. Historians still debate the exact timeline of when demotic script overtook hieratic, but the tension was real. It's the ancient equivalent of debating fonts in a group project. You get a peek at something juicier, propaganda. One wall scroll contains an exaggerated account of a minor military campaign. It reads like a blockbuster. The general vanquished 100 Nubian raiders before lunch. A scribe leans over and whispers, "It was 6 guys and a goat." You laugh, but it's a serious reminder. History, even back then, was written with an agenda, or at least a flair for drama. As you settle onto a stool, you notice a pile of discarded drafts on the floor, crossed out names, smeared glyphs, some with frustrated ink blot explosions. One of them simply reads, "No papyrus tomorrow. Out of stock. Again." You've never related so hard to a 3,000-year-old complaint. A young apprentice is hunched over a training scroll, copying out a famous phrase over and over. The scribe's pen is mightier than the farmer's plow. It's not exactly subtle. Becoming a scribe was seen as the ladder out of manual labor. And these proverbs weren't just motivational, they were PR campaigns. Why carry bricks when you can carry thoughts? One elder says with a chuckle. One scroll in the corner catches your eye. It's not a record, or a spell, or even a letter. It's a story. A full-on, Papyrus born tale of gods, tricksters, and revenge. The tale of the doomed prince, your host explains, a favorite. It's got prophecy, monsters, dramatic sighing, all the ingredients of a Netflix binge. It's worth remembering. Some scribes moonlighted as authors, weaving fables, satires, and even smut. Yes, really. There's a well-worn text known to scholars today as the Satire of the Trades, in which a scribe roasts every other profession for being sweaty, painful, or embarrassing. You imagine a crowd laughing at a public reading. The potter stinks of mud. The fisherman sleeps with crocodiles. Tough crowd. Your quirky tidbit for the day. Some scribes developed calluses so thick from holding pens that they carved tiny animal faces into them. One particularly worn reed pen in the workshop is topped with what looks like a frog in a crown. The apprentice swears it brings good luck. You suspect it's more about boredom during census season. Late in the day, the head scribe brings out a ceremonial document. Calligraphy at its finest. Gilded ink, pristine papyrus, polished margins. It's a retirement decree for a priest, full of praise and formal flourish. May your name endure like the sun rising over fresh ink. That's honestly kind of lovely. You're starting to see why papyrus was more than paper. It was permanence, or at least the hope of it. Before you leave, someone hands you a mock diploma. It reads, "Scribe of moderate talent and excellent owl drawings. You're honored. Also slightly roasted." As you step outside, the air hums with a different kind of energy. The scribes are closing shop, packing scrolls into reed baskets, sealing documents with clay stamps. A young boy races by, carrying a message wrapped tight in linen. Bureaucracy never sleeps. Even the gods, it seems, run on memos. The workshop fades behind you as the stars rise. Points of light that once guided scribes writing calendars by moonlight. You wonder how many scrolls, tossed or lost, still rest in the sands, waiting to be found, waiting to speak. And you walk on with fingers still smudged in ink, the scent of soot still in your nose, and a brain full of owls, proverbs, and forged goat raids. Welcome to the scribe's world, equal parts glamour, gossip, and graphite.